Morning. It's good to be here, isn't it, this morning? Well, me and someone, I'm not sure who it was. We're happy we're here. So I want to speak to you for a short while this morning about times when we've met someone and it's had a really significant impact on us. I'm sure we can all look back on our lives and remember times when we met a particular person and that conversation or that meeting affected how our life went from that point. We maybe made a decision to do something. I actually, when I was thinking about this, I thought of the time I met a minor celebrity. So do you remember the programme Gladiators back in the 90s? And there was a guy in that called Wolf, who was one of the gladiators. And I became Wolf's bank manager. And I went to meet him one day, the first time I'd ever met him. And he opened the door of his house to let me in. And the first thing that struck me was, he's only the same size as me. I was expecting this man mountain to open the door. And he was only the same height as me, and yeah, he was a little bit muscly, but it wasn't this dramatic thing I was expecting. And the other thing that I noticed was he had the whitest teeth that I've ever seen in my life. They literally, you know, that sparkle they do sometimes. He opened his mouth and his white teeth, and it sparkled in the sunlight. And the other thing I remember about that meeting was he had white carpets, rock and roll. White carpets in his house. I have to say that meeting didn't profoundly change me, but I've never forgotten that meeting. I had another meeting with a guy called Tony Thistlethwaite. Hard to say that name. And I've never forgotten that meeting because that was the interview I had to join Barclays Bank. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop opposite the bank with my stomach going crazy, something like the guys that are going to come up here and talk later, their stomachs are probably going a bit like that, and thinking this could direct where my life ends up. If I get this job, that could lead me off in a certain way, and subsequently I did get a job with Barclays, so I've never forgotten that. And then there was, I had another meeting. First time I met Derek and Irene Meldrum, which was 40 years ago this year. And they moved down from Scotland to pastor this church. And I remember in Lyddon, in the building in Lyddon, we had a welcome service for them. I remember he drove a Cortina estate. These details are very important, you know, for us guys. Cortina estate, I remember it well. And little did I know that also on that day I would meet my wife, who was 9 at the time. So I never forgot that meeting. So some of those meetings, and I'm sure you're the same, we've had encounters with people and our life has changed as a result of that encounter. And we're just going to look really quickly at a couple of stories in the Bible where people meet Jesus. And it's a really unforgettable meeting. What I want to say is, what I'm going to draw out of this is the fact that the responses to meeting Jesus are not always the same. And maybe we can identify with that. So in Luke 18, Luke's a gospel. Luke is part of the New Testament, and it tells us about the life, death and resurrection of Jesus. In Luke 18, there's a story of a rich ruler, a young guy who is powerful, who has authority, who has influence, and he meets Jesus and he says to Jesus, what do I need to do to have eternal life? What do I need to do to get into heaven? And Jesus says, you know the commandments, don't you? And he says, yes. He says, you know that it says, do not commit adultery, do not steal, honour your father and mother, keep the Sabbath. He says, yes, I do all those. I've done all those since I was a child. I was taught to do those things. And Jesus says to him, there's one thing you're missing though. you're a rich man, you need to sell everything you've got, give it to the poor, and follow me. And the guy thinks about this really seriously, and he decides he can't do it. And it says he goes away grieving. He goes away really sad because he understands that to follow Jesus is going to cost something. And he's weighed up that cost, and he's decided with his own free will that he's not going to pursue it, or he feels he can't pursue it. And it says he goes away sad. And I don't think he would ever have forgotten that meeting. The one time he met Jesus, where he was challenged about who he was, his lifestyle and his beliefs, and he decided that he wasn't going to follow Jesus. He decided that the power and the influence and the money that he had was more important. In the very next chapter, there's a story about a guy called Zacchaeus. And anyone who's been to Sunday school would know the story of Zacchaeus. It's in Luke 19. We're just going to read a few verses at the start of Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was going to come that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay you back 4 times the amount. I will pay them back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." So this is another story about money, but the principle of what I'm talking about is not about money. It's about what we really value in our lives. And for these two guys, it was money. That money gave them power and influence, and they liked that. And there was a different reaction. Zacchaeus' reaction is really different to the reaction of the other rich young ruler. And Zacchaeus had got himself into a position where it was probably, although he was rich and powerful, it was probably not a really nice life he was leading, because the Jews would have considered him no longer a Jew, because he was actually working for the enemy, the occupying Roman forces. And the habit of tax collectors was that they would collect the tax for the Romans, they would also collect a slice of it for themselves, and a lot of them would charge a lot more than they should be, and became very rich as a result, but the people hated them. And Zacchaeus is one of these tax collectors. He's been rejected, he's not even considered to be a Jew anymore. He wouldn't be allowed in the temple. He would be considered unclean as far as they were concerned. He was sort of separated from society. And Jesus meets this guy. And Jesus confronts with Zacchaeus the same thing he confronts with the other rich ruler, which is, what is the thing that is most important in your life? Is it the money that you've amassed, the power that you've amassed, or am I the most important thing in your life? Is your relationship with God, is your relationship with Jesus the most important thing in your life? And Zacchaeus is able to say, "Jesus, you are going to be the most important thing in my life. I'm not going to forget this meeting. This meeting that I've had with you is going to change my life, and change my life for the better." And actually, Jesus says, as a result of what he decides, Jesus reinstates him back into the Jewish family. He calls him a son of Abraham. And all the Jews considered themselves sons or daughters of Abraham. Jesus says, you're back in the family, you're restored. So there's a transformation that goes on in the life of Zacchaeus. He goes from this place of being ostracised to a place where he's restored. He goes from a place where the most important thing in his life is money and the power and the influence that gets him, to a place where the most important thing is in his life is to follow Jesus and to do what Jesus asked him to do. Massive transformation has taken place in his life because he has encountered Jesus. Now later on, in a few minutes' time, you're going to hear some stories, you're going to hear what we could call testimonies of how people have met Jesus today. And just like the two stories that I mentioned, they had a choice. They could have chosen to carry on the way they were going, but they have chosen to make Jesus the priority in their lives. And they have chosen to allow these other things to find their natural place behind that, because they have chosen to put Jesus first.